The tables are turned a bit in this episode of the Vet Podcast. Someone else is asking the questions. Alex Avery is a veterinarian in the neighbouring practice to my old one. In a town the size of ours, about 30,000 people, what's the chances of us both being veterinary podcasters? Alex produces a podcast named Call the Vet, which is well worth listening to. And he approached me to have a chat for his podcast. So of course I said yes, and then I flogged it. So, Alex and I discuss how veterinary practice has changed over the years, how treatments have improved, why vets aren't really expensive, vet-client relationships, but not the way you're thinking, client expectations, and the sad state of mental health of vets.
Are you a veterinarian dreaming about working down under in New Zealand? If so, I'd love to help you make that dream come true. Hi, I'm Julie South of VetStaff. VetStaff is New Zealand's only recruitment agency specialising in the Kiwi veterinary sector. We can help you find your dream job down under, from short-term locum assignments through to permanent employment and residency. Because we know God's own Aotearoa New Zealand like the back of our hands, we can match your career aspirations with a clinic that'll suit you best, whether you're planning to work here for a few months or forever. If it's got anything to do with working in a vet clinic in New Zealand, we can help. vetstaff.co.nz.
You are listening to the Vet Podcast, presented by veterinarian Dr. Brian Greger from New Zealand. Join us as we discuss pet health issues from around the world.
Brian, welcome to the show. I'm really excited for our conversation today, and start off by saying that it's amazing that we live in this kind of rural New Zealand community and we've got two podcasters in the same small town. So we'll touch on your podcast a little bit, but I'd love to hear just a little bit of a background of kind of your life as a veterinarian.
Okay, well, I'm a little bit older than you. New Zealand trained at Massey University, a 1982 graduate, so I'm now retired, a year and a half ago now, just pre-COVID. I've sort of been living the life in isolation, which has been quite nice. So I qualified in 82, started work in 83, originally worked in the small animal practice in Christchurch. I was never going to be a small animal vet. I was only ever going to be a cow vet. The dairy cow vet. My interview was quite interesting with old Cam Purdy, the old original practice owner, the old doyen of small animal medicine in Christchurch, where I remember he gave me a ring saying, "Do you want to work for us as well?" Not really, but I will if I have to. Work for him for a few months. And then I went from there up to what I thought was my dream job, Opunaki in the Taranaki as a truly mixed practitioner. Mainly a dairy practice, but I was doing everything, which is where I got my real interest in small animal medicine. Came down with the chance to open up a clinic in our town now in Timaru in South Canterbury of New Zealand, which is the South Island of New Zealand. And that was 1986. And much like you guys have just done, after a few years, we built a nice new big flash clinic, and I was there from 86 until I retired a year and a half ago. The older I got, the more I got knocked around from work, from cattle and horses and skiing and rugby and motocross, and decided to park up behind a consult table and concentrated mainly in medicine for the last 5 or 10 years, and pulled the plug and continued on with my podcasting.
Yeah, fantastic. That amazing career that you've had is kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you today, because you were able to, be a real part of the community and you developed incredibly strong bonds with your clients. I mean, it was always a case of, we worked in, adjacent clinics, and it was always, I normally go and see Brian, not I normally go and see, the business. So it was that relationship that you had with them, which is really important and really highly valuable. And we'll kind of come on to that in a little bit. But, in that time that you were in clinical practice, I imagine you've seen a massive change in the type of vetting that we're doing on a daily basis.
Oh, absolutely, hugely. And I mean, there was even a change in the kind of vetting that was going on from when I qualified in our state-of-the-art small animal practice in Christchurch, went to a rural practice in the North Island. I can think of the drugs that we had. I mean, our drug cabinet had maybe 2 or 3 different antibiotics, lots of sulfur drugs, no such thing as non-steroidals over and above, I've forgotten the name ago. That's not just a drug that's not available now. One of these real old-fashioned strip the lining out of your stomach kind of anti-inflammatories, a little bit of eye drop, and a heck of a lot of cortisone. That was our medication. And if you couldn't fix it with antibiotics and cortisone, probably wasn't going to come right. But, just from there to where practice was when I left it, with all the machines that we had parked up there and the availability over and above that to all the referral clinics, which were never available back in the day, it's a totally different world now than it was when I started.
Yeah, it's funny when you say that, the antibiotic and the cortisone. So when I saw practice, so this would be, I don't know, going back 2003 or 4, the clinic that I saw was I look back and think of it as a real James Herriot practice, but pretty much everything walked out the door with a shot of Betamox, which is a long-acting antibiotic, and a shot of steroid, which was mixed in the same syringe and administered in the same injection. And, that's just what was done. Even MRIs, CT scans, they weren't available outside of the major universities, and referral centres weren't a thing. That's in the UK, which maybe people would think was, a little bit further ahead, but you don't have to go back that far to think of all these things. So with that in mind, what's the obvious impact on the health of our pets is that we're able to do an awful lot more, but that comes with kind of a cost and as well higher expectations from the client as well. I certainly find that.
Yeah, I think that's it exactly. And I mean, if you just even look at the health statistics of cats, I remember, don't even know how long ago it was, maybe 15 years, 20 years ago, one of the cat food companies had a competition for the oldest cat on veterinary records in New Zealand, and the oldest cat was 20. Part of that was a reflection, I think, of probably back in the day, the records were all on paper and weren't that flash. But if you have a look at your records and our old records, I would imagine you'd probably have 30 or 40 cats over 20 on your records, and you're probably, the old cats are pushing out to 22 or 23 or 24 now. So that, I'm sure, is a reflection on the increase in healthcare that these animals are getting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we know so much more about them as well. And, one of the big part of being a vet is to do your continued professional development, try and stay up to date, which, to be honest, can be a real challenge if you're trying to stay up to date in every single area, because the amount of progress has been huge. From a veterinary point of view, that's as a veterinarian, that's the difference that there's been, but also the other staff that are involved with our pets' care has also developed to a pretty rapid rate as well.
It's continuing to develop too, I think. Again, when I started, we had a couple of vet nurses working for us, but they weren't qualified vet nurses. They were really, really good, but they were probably glorified kennel handlers. And I'm just hoping that Karen isn't listening to this now. But, they were really just glorified kennel handlers. Whereas now, if you look at it, we have got, in New Zealand, we have got I shouldn't say bog standard vet nurse, but because, I don't mean that to be demeaning, but, you've got the entry level vet nurses who have got their qualifications, but they're moving up there to the diploma in veterinary nursing and then the Bachelor of Veterinary Technology, I think they call it, don't they? Yeah. And if you look at the standard of the nursing coming out of the UK, it's on a par with human nursing, with what's required and the knowledge, which in a lot of ways actually keeps the vets honest as well, because we know that we have actually got, it's almost like somebody giving a second opinion every time we do something, which is terrific. It's really, really good.
Yeah, absolutely. They, and I think it's good to work in an environment where they're not scared to kind of pipe up and say, oh, hang on a minute, should we be doing this? Or have you thought about doing it this way? I think that's good. I love that kind of collegial aspect of it. And you're right, in the UK, I do think the nurses level is a step up as a general rule from New Zealand. And then in the States, it's that again. And certainly some of these veterinary technicians in the States, I think, are at another level again. So with all of that kind of teamwork that goes into care now, the inevitable conversation then moves to cost, because living in the online world, as I'm sure you're aware, it's one of the big criticisms is the cost of veterinary care is so much, but there's a reason why it has increased over the years to what it is now, isn't it?
Oh, exactly. And I mean, running a veterinary practice for a number of years, I can tell you that the economics are pretty tight. You get it wrong, not very much, and there's nothing left, and you might as well shut up shop. So, I think people have to realise there's a couple of things going on here. Primarily, vets go to work to save animals. That's what we're going to work for. But in saying that, if the vet practice isn't keeping its head above water, we're not going to be there, and we're not going to be able to save the animals. So, there's all the stuff that goes on under it. But the bottom line is that veterinary practices have to at least break even in order to keep supplying the service. And then you've got all of the horrendous expenses coming in under that. One of the big issues I used to hear was, goodness, I go to the doctor and it was only half the price of what you're charging. Now, I'm not sure how medical fees around the rest of the world go, but here in New Zealand, the government subsidises the general practitioners and the surgeons and whoever else to a huge extent. So what people are getting charged at the doctors isn't what the doctor is making out of the visit. It's the residue when the subsidies go in. So that was one of the hardest things that we used to have to deal with, and I'm sure you're still hearing it now.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly hear that now, and the same with the dental work that we do. We have the added difficulty, I guess, with our dentistry that we need to anaesthetise our patients, which adds a huge increase in complexity to, when you compare it to what we do when we just sit in a chair and open our mouths. But we had exactly the same problem in the UK with the NHS, which is a phenomenal institution, but people have absolutely no idea what the cost of care they're receiving is. I imagine maybe in the States, people are a bit more aware with it, more of an insurance model and private healthcare being normal. But yeah, that's a really big thing. And I guess the other thing that I'd like to point out is that actually given that we've just discussed how much better qualified our nurses are and are becoming, their salaries often haven't really kept up with the level of skill that they're bringing to the table.
Oh, exactly. When you have a look at what the senior vet nurses are getting paid and look at the equivalent employment of what jobs other people are working at, the vet nurses very, very poorly paid, especially for the responsibility that they take on. As vets, we tend to put a lot of faith in their abilities because it's them that are doing the anaesthetic monitoring, and it's them that are doing the post-op monitoring, and it's them that are doing the discharge consults and all of those sort of things. So they are working at a very, very high level.
Yeah. So I think people can be, I don't want to turn this into a rant about how, an amazing value it is, which it is. And but we can bang on that drum for a long time. So there's that aspect. And I think the more that people work with us as individuals, they maybe appreciate the more they engage in veterinary care, and maybe a lot of people have had their own experience with the health system. And actually I get it after hours, for example, a lot of the time go, wow, it's amazing that you could see us so quickly. Or I can say to people, well, I'll have those test results back later today or tomorrow, and people are flabbergasted because in the human system it takes 3 weeks to get the results back. Then they have to wait another couple of weeks to get the consultation with the specialist to then have that delivered. So with that in mind, and talking about the relationship being important, kind of from a veterinary point of view, why do you feel it's important that you kind of trust the clients as much as they trust what you're telling them?
I think you almost have to I'm going to put it back to you. You ring up to make a doctor's appointment and your doctor isn't there and you're going to get a locum. What's your first feeling?
They know what they're doing, don't you? And you hope that they're experienced and you hope that they're personable and that you'll get on with them, really.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you're a wee bit more forgiving than me. I tend to put the consultation on hold and wait till the doctor's back because I'm quite old school as far as what I think that the client-vet relationship should be. I'm a great believer in the patients or the clients having their own vet in the clinic. The number of times that we used to get complaints that, I see a different vet every time. There's a few different things that are involved in there. The first one is that you do, as a veterinarian, you do get a rapport with the client, a personable rapport. And for a straight cynical point of view, if you have got a rapport with the client, they are going to tell you things. And again, I'm sure you've seen it. A lot of the information that you get out of a consultation isn't by you saying, is your dog doing this? Have you seen that? Tell me about. It's in the chit chat that goes on. And if you have got a client who is comfortable with the chit chat, you'll be talking away and they'll throw something in there, like, we've got problems with rats at the moment. Nothing to do with the consult. There's one of the things that we need to have a look at. And you do get to know the animals as well. I know that we see a lot of animals through our consult tables, but you do get to know the animals. And one of the things that I used to use a lot to determine what was going on with the animal was actually its behaviour, how it reacted to me, how it reacted to the environment, what it was looking at. And you can actually pick up, because you know the animal, you can pick up these little subtle things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, because a lot of the time there's an element of stress in that dog or cat that's coming to see you. So they're not behaving like they do at home. And they might be brighter because those endorphins are flowing. But even then, they still are going to be subjectively more dull than when you've seen them for their vaccination, for example, and they've been nervous, but still a lot brighter. And you're absolutely right. Those throwaway comments are so valuable and also help you assess how serious an issue might be, because one person's, they're bleeding out, they're bleeding to death is, a little bit of a drop of blood from a cut nail. Whereas the farmer who goes, it's got a little bit of a wound, but she'll be all right kind of thing. And it's, major surgery that individual needs on an emergency basis. So, there's that. What I also wonder in a lot of cases, and maybe not so much where we are in the world, but a lot of vets are worried about litigation. And they're worried about being sued and paranoid and scared of making a mistake, which is going to happen because we're all humans. And I'm sure you've got stories of, mistakes you've made, and I've got mine as well. But that leads to kind of a practice of defensive medicine where every test gets, ordered. And that has its own impact on care as well, doesn't it?
Oh, exactly. And I was actually going to mention that because that's something that I really see with the younger vets when they're coming through the clinic. You get a cat in with a simple condition, something that they can diagnose just looking at it grossly. And because of their concern of either litigation or of the vet council or the governing veterinary body taking, their license off them, which, to be fair, very, very, very seldom happens. I mean, you've got to be stealing the heroin out of whatever out of the safe to get that sort of thing. I have seen a cat which comes in with a cat bite abscess, and it's a simple, straightforward cat bite abscess. And instead of treating it in the usual manner, they have got full blood screens and x-rays done on it, and the client walks out the door with $1,000 bill for something that didn't need it at all. And the reason that they've done that is simply because the vet it's probably one of my hobby horses, it's what they have been taught is gold standard and they have to do at vet school. And that's not the real world, because you've got to remember that it's actually not you that's paying the bill. I think this sort of goes back to something that we should actually mention too, is I've always worked under the philosophy that clients don't know the difference between a good and a bad vet technically. What they know is the personability, the friendliness of the vet. So one of the things that I always tried to do, and I always tried to get my young vets to do, was to actually be sociable to the clients and to be nice to them. Drop this big clinical facade. You don't need to be aloof from the clients. They are they are definitely better at their job than you are at your job. Get off your high horse and, just talk to them, and talk to them in a language that they can understand too. Don't go throwing the big words in there. If it's stuffed, say it's stuffed. Don't go and put cotton wool around everything. Yeah,
I think one of the big joys that I find in the work that we do is actually the relationships that you build with the clients. working with the animals is great and making them better is fantastic, and doing the surgeries is, really enjoyable. But actually it's those relationships. Actually, when we were in lockdown, I struggled with that, not having that face-to-face communication, not being able to pick up on all of those non-verbal cues, which you hear are so important about, but actually until you don't get them, you don't necessarily realize how much communication does happen on a non-verbal basis. So that's certainly my philosophy, I guess, and my joy in the practice. And a lot of people don't share that view because they were actually loving the fact that, the pet parents weren't in with them and they could, kind of look things up in the book and not feel the pressure maybe of having to come up with that decision. But yeah, it all highlights, just how important that relationship is. And I think you're right. If the pet owner knows the vet, they know their approach, then they can be confident in what they're being told. And the vet can be confident to, maybe tell it like it is or say what the best option is, because it's easy to practice gold standard medicine. Well, it's not easy, but there's a set of steps for each thing that we could do. It's going to cost thousands of dollars, and that's not the reality for a lot of people. And actually, for me, the art of being a vet is to work with limitations and to find out what's best for the individual, which is going to vary very differently for the same condition.
Exactly, because this comes back to the old art of veterinary science. I am old enough to still appreciate the art of veterinary science, and comes down, I think, the terms prescriptive medicine, I don't know. That's what I'm calling it anyway. A lot of it is actually, it's not intuition. It's, you just know. It's the second sense that comes out of a lot of experience too, I think, because one of the things that I hear a lot of vets saying is that they actually don't like doing vaccinations because they're doing the same old. I love doing vaccinations, one, because there's not normally a lot of stress involved in it and you can have a really good yarn. But the main thing is that you are seeing your animals, 5, 10, 15, 20 vaccinations a day, however many you're doing. Every one of those, you are examining a normal animal. When you get the non-normal animal come through, because you've seen so many normals, it's so much easier to pick that up. It's different. There's something not right with this animal, which I find very, very handy.
Yeah. And I also think if you've got a relationship with the client, when we're then switching to a more preventative mindset, it's actually easier maybe to make that recommendation that a little bit of weight needs to be lost because you know how to do it in a way that's not going to offend them and it's going to keep them on board. And so actually have action taken, or recommending that scale and polish rather than leaving it until the mouth is an absolute horrendous sewer pit and you're pulling out 20 teeth. So I think that's easier. And also I think I would like to think anyway that your client is going to take more notice of what you're saying because they know how you work and they know that you've got their pet's best interest at heart. So actually the impact that we can have then becomes a lot more for a lot less money.
Exactly. I think probably another thing that I see that goes on with clients as they're coming in is the expectation as to what is going to be done. And this is where I directly poke my finger at a lot of these veterinary programs that are on television, where you've got, I'm not going to point out any particular vet programs, but, there are these programs where there are these sort of $1 million titanium implants getting put in animals and, even a lot of the run-of-the-mill general practice kind of programs where the animal comes in, it's sick, the vet does something amazing, the animal walks out and it's fine. What they don't tell you is what went on in the middle in there. And the big part that they don't tell you is what it cost. There is a lot of expectation, I think, that anything that comes in can be fixed. And to be fair, most things that come in, you've got a reasonable chance of getting them right. For money. It's all going to cost. The hardware that goes into orthopedics is horrendous. It's probably 80% of the whole thing. I mean,
you can't do it cheaply because you take away the professional fee, if you like, the fee that the vet is charging, and you've still got a multi-$1,000 bill. That's actually the equipment and the anesthetic is the majority of the price there. I mean, you're absolutely right. You watch these, and I'll be careful not to name any names as well, but you get that potted history of sick one day, surgery the next day, home the day after. No money has changed hands. There's been no complications, and every animal has a happy happy outcome. But, unfortunately, that isn't the case. You do get complications. Some take longer. Some need second surgeries. Some, have, unfortunately, not optimal outcomes. But we don't see, any of those things. To be honest, I don't watch any of these programs because they just annoy me and I end up shouting at the telly.
Yeah, I have to admit the same thing. And then I'm sort of there saying, no, don't be dramatic about that because this is what's wrong with it. But didn't make good telly. I think there's probably a few other things. I know it wasn't what we actually set out to talk about, but if you look at the pressures that young vets in particular are under, I think you might have done a podcast at some stage on suicide. I know I did one a few months ago. It's hard work being a vet and a vet nurse, and people tend to be quite quick at throwing the borax at vets if things don't go quite right. And there's a few reasons for that, I think. There is the television programs. Social media is the big one. People, keyboard warriors in a way.
It's a beast and there's no comeback, isn't it? People can write a complaint and they write their side, how they perceived things, which is often, I've never thankfully been at the receiving end, but I've certainly known people, and the facts as stated on social media were nothing like the actual facts. But the vets then they can't jump on and say, well, actually, hang on a minute, this is what we discussed and this is what happened. Yeah. Because they're just not allowed because of client confidentiality.
Yeah, exactly. And that leads on to the fact that suicide in veterinarians is the highest of any profession, which is really, really sad. Your listeners may have seen EMV, Not One More Vet, on their veterinary professional friends' Facebook and Instagram profile pictures. It's just awful.
Yeah, and that's certainly something that anyone who's on any of my social platforms will have seen as well, because it's really important. And I don't want to give the impression then that it's all the client's fault for that, and they shouldn't complain if they think there's something that hasn't been done as it should have been, then absolutely. But there are appropriate channels to do that, as fully functional adults in society rather than just mudslinging, I guess. So people should be comfortable. And it's a multifaceted thing, I think, within the industry. There's lots of, reasons why there's that tragic statistic. And I guess actually one thing I did mean to say when we're talking about how veterinary medicine has changed is actually the student loan as well. If I think when I came out of university, so I've been in practice 15 years now, I think I had about £18,000, give or take, student loan. Whereas now I hear that UK graduates are coming out with £80,000 to £100,000. And in the US, it is, $250,000 to $300,000 is not an unusual amount. To be honest, I'm not sure what it is in New Zealand at the moment, but those are huge numbers. And, how people are paying that back in any time when they've got mortgages and kids and families and, knowing what they earn, it's no wonder there's an element of stress there as well. Fantastic. Well, Brian, I think we could talk, there's a whole load of different aspects that we've discovered, and it's great to dive into this with you. You mentioned, and we mentioned at the beginning, your podcast. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that? And obviously I'll put all the links in the show notes to that, because it's definitely something that, if you're interested in listening to this today, then you should definitely jump and check out Brian's show as well.
That would be great. Well, I've been going for a large number of years, I think 14, 16 years or something. The podcast is called The Vetpodcast, so it's all one word, VETPODCAST. So if you look at it on any of the social platforms, you'll find it. Listen to it through whatever podcast player you're using. So I try and produce one every 2 or 3 weeks, produce a podcast. It's pretty across the board as to who it's aimed at. It's not technical as far as being aimed directly at veterinarians or vet techs. It tends to be sort of around the edges a wee bit, where it's mainly interviews. I interviewed last week, the podcast up just in the last day or so, talking to a veterinarian from Spain who specialises in bees. So who knew there was such a thing as a bee vet? There's been some really diverse things. A guy called Jim White. Jim White is Arthur White's son. Now, Arthur White might ring a bell to some veterinary people. Arthur White was the pseudonym of James Herriot. So it was interesting you mentioned James Herriot before. So it was the 50th anniversary, I think, of the closing of the practice, or I don't know, there was some anniversary involved in it. So we had a good conversation with Jim to talking to vets or a vet nurse in Omar or somewhere in the somewhere in Arabia, who was a nurse in one of these big compounds over there, and it was a discussion on people buying pets from the zooks, from the stalls over there, and the problems that they had. So it's very, very diverse. We've talked to pet nutritionalists. So if people want to have a listen, just chase it up. Just search Vetpodcast, all one word. Just Google it or in your player, and you will find us. And I'm much the same as you. We love subscriptions. Jump on in.
Subscriptions, absolutely. Subscribe, like, share, all of the rest of it. Yeah, I mean, I love the podcasting medium as well, because I listen to podcasts on my way into work, and you get a much deeper dive than you do with any other information, be that a blog or a video. The podcast, it allows us to talk about things that people maybe didn't even know that you needed to know. So I think, much like our conversation today, I think it'd be very difficult to deliver this in something that was Google search friendly, because it's not what people are looking for. But actually the impact of knowing that, okay, well, we need to have a good relationship with our vet. So, let's stick to the same vet rather than chopping and changing just because you're saving $2 by going, to the clinic in the other town. Well, you're probably spending that in petrol. Things like that actually can make such a huge difference. So, Brian, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. We maybe have to do one of these in person, seeing we should take advantage of the fact that two podcasters living very closely together.
We're in the same town. Exactly. I might give you the opportunity now, because I'm going to steal this and put it up as my podcast. How would you like to announce yourself to the Vet Podcast listeners?
Okay, so Vet Podcast listeners. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. So you can find me at the Call the Vet show. So yeah, again, search on your podcasting app. I'm sure there'll be links in the show notes. And also ourpetshealth.com, which is kind of my online home where I've got all my blog posts and videos and podcasts as well. So yeah, lovely. It'll be great to share everybody. And yeah, thanks for the conversation today, Brian.
Great. It's been an absolute pleasure, Alex. And me popping up in other podcasts doesn't finish here. Recently, I've also chatted to Julie South, producer of Claws, Paws and Wet Noses, another New Zealand-based podcast which discusses topics which matter to vets. She has produced a couple of podcasts from our chat on podcasting, especially as it relates to veterinary practice. Have a listen. Search for Claws, Paws and Wet Noses in your normal podcast player. And that's it for another episode of the Vet Podcast. All of our links are in one place at beacons.ai/vetpodcast. That is beacons.ai/vetpodcast. And while you're there, don't forget to buy us a coffee. On behalf of me, Brian Gregor, and everybody else involved in the making of this podcast, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you again soon.